guys, it's Jane and welcome back to Mystery Monday. Today I'm just going to talk to you really quickly about Josephine Tay's book, The Daughter of Time. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago in one of my Friday reads. This book was voted on by the Crime Writers Association of Great Britain as the greatest crime novel of all time, which is a pretty big accolade. When I came across the list and found this, I had not even heard of this book, which goes to show how exactly unwidely read that I am. But nevertheless, I've now read it, and let me tell you a little bit about it. This book was written in the 1950s, and for all that it is a product of its time, it's certainly something that's worth reading now. The story follows a police detective who, at the time of this story, is laid up in a hospital bed, unable to move in traction after coming to harm in the course of his duties. So he's laid up in hospital and he's suffering fairly majorly from boredom. Friends visit and bring him books, but nothing especially tempts him. One woman friend of his, who is an actress, does something a little bit different. She goes to the National Portrait Gallery and comes back to visit him with a collection of prints of faces, because she is a connoisseur of faces and she knows that her friend, the police detective, is as well. So she brings him all these pictures of faces, and he has a bit of a diverting afternoon looking through these portraits, but one in particular, one portrait really grasps his attention. And then he turns the page over, the print over, and reads on the back the name of the person pictured, and it's quite surprising to him. This is a portrait of Richard III, the infamous King of England, one of the most reviled characters in British history. You may be familiar with the portrait of him that Shakespeare writes, which is by no means a flattering one. And the reason why it was disconcerting to our hero police detective is that the face, the person behind the face that he sees, is not someone he would think of as a murderer. And yet this man is held responsible for one of the most notorious murders in British history. The Princes in the Tower. The story goes that King Richard did away with his two nephews because their claim to the throne threatened him. And this is the starting point to the story, The Daughter of Time. Our police detective decides that he just wants to look into the story a bit more. He remembers being taught this history as a child at school, and but doesn't really know any of the details. And just looking at this picture of this man, he doesn't come across to him as an evil guy. He asks a number of people's opinions of the picture. A doctor that comes to visit him thinks that maybe he's suffering from some sort of illness. Another person who comes to visit him picks him as a saint. That's the kind of impression that he gets from the portrait. And so our police detective hero decides to dig into the story. Luckily, his friend, the actress, knows a historical researcher who has some time on his hands. And so this guy comes in and he does some legwork for our police detective, digging up sources. And the story is really about what can actually still be known from first-hand accounts of what actually happened at the time when the Tudors came to power. Richard III was the last of the Plantagenet kings, and when he was dethroned, he died in battle. The next king that came after him was from a completely different line. So it was a whole change of dynasty. And this, of course, raises the question of how accurate the historical record about Richard is, because, as the cliche goes, it's the victors who write the histories. And that is really the theme of this book, questioning history and what becomes acknowledged as history, and how the acknowledged version of history differs from what the records actually show. I'm not going to tell you what conclusions our police detective comes to about Richard III and what actually happened to the Princes in the Tower, because that's part of the joy of the read, is following the logic. All of the stuff in the book is based on actual historical records, although the conclusions that are drawn are still controversial. This is still a big area of controversy in historical circles. Was Richard III a monster, or was he painted that way by history? But yeah, that is what this book is all about. The title comes from a quote from Francis Bacon, which is that truth is the daughter of time, not authority. Time passing allows us to see what actually happened. The voice of authority does not make truth. And that's a really appropriate title for the book, because the argument is that he, from his later vantage point, can actually find out the truth. It's a relatively slow-paced story. There's no, guns drawn and action. All the stuff that's in contention is stuff that's already happened hundreds of years previously. But it's nevertheless a really engaging read. So if history is something that's interesting to you, maybe especially the history of the British Isles, I would encourage you to have a look at Josephine Tey's The Daughter of Time. Anyway, that's what I've got time for today. I hope you're all well, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!